What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, with a look at the Samsung Galaxy S3 for Verizon. Now as you know, I've already done a very detailed review of the Galaxy S3, but that was the unlocked international version. The version I have here from Verizon contains 4G LTE, which means much faster network speeds. We also get some spec differences here. So in terms of internal specs, we go from a quad-core Exynos processor running at 1.4 gigahertz to a dual-core 1.5 gigahertz Snapdragon processor. This also has 1 gig of RAM, but the 4G version has 2 gigs of RAM. So if we take this out, we can see it looks pretty familiar. There is no difference in the design. There is very little difference in terms of software, and we'll take a look at that. But the design is otherwise unchanged. So we get some branding here, obviously for Verizon, 4G LTE, along with Galaxy S3. The branding on the front is unchanged, so we have Samsung at the top. And otherwise the configuration is identical. Now this is available in two colors, white or blue, two capacities, 16 gig or 32 gig. Now the great thing about the Galaxy S3 is that it supports 64 gig SD cards. So we pop off the back here, which is easy. You see you have a little thumb tab here to pop it off. You can see we have a little slot here for an SD card slot, a mini SD card. So you can pop in 64 gigs and have quite a bit of storage, so both internal storage and added storage. We also have our SIM card here. Now besides those internal specs, these are largely the same phones. They have the same dimensions, same screen size, same battery capacity, same software, same cameras, same display, everything. So let's quickly go through them. So we have an 8 megapixel autofocusing shooter with stabilization for excellent video recording, so it can record 1080p video. We have our speaker here, along with our LED flash. On the bottom we have our micro USB connector, which can also be used as the video output, so you can connect this to a television for video output. We have our little microphone down here. We should have another microphone up here for noise cancellation. On the side we have our sleep-wake power button. On this side we have our volume rocker, and on the front we have a physical home button. Up top we have our earpiece, along with an ambient light sensor and proximity sensor, and our camera. Now this is a 2 megapixel camera, which also works with the Smart Stay technology, which is able to view or able to determine if your eyes are staring at the screen and will prevent it from going to sleep if you're actively using it. Now before we boot up the phone to take a look at the software, let's take a look at the contents that's included with the phone. So in here we have our literature pack, which I'll leave sealed. We also have our 4G LTE SIM card, which is where this originated from, so the card should be right here. So the card is already installed. Now down here we have our USB wall charger, so you can see the USB is side mounted. We have our Samsung branding, much larger than the ones I've seen from other Samsung devices. We also have a pair of in-ear headphones, along with looks like a microphone and remote control for controlling the volume, pause, playback, answer calls. We also have a micro USB charging cable here, Samsung branded, and that's all there is to it. Now just to show you the differences between the phones, on the left is our Verizon phone, on the right is the unlocked international version, and there is a difference in the boot sequence, so let's just boot them up to take a look. So I'm just holding the power button on the right side. So we get that familiar 4G LTE Verizon logo, as well as that Verizon tune. And it does take longer for this to boot up than the unlocked version. Now up top you also see our little LED indicator right up here, which is used for notifications, a lot like the Galaxy Nexus. Now the display of both devices are carried over. They're exactly the same. So we have a Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1280 by 720. That gives us a PPI of 306. Again, these are 4.8-inch displays, so they're quite large. They're both Pentile displays, so they still have that Pentile sub-pixel display technology, which is I'm not a huge fan of it, but it looks great on these devices. I'm definitely a big fan of the display, whether it's Pentile or not. Super AMOLED is a beautiful display, very colorful, very rich, deep colors, deep contrast. That's one of the great things about AMOLED technology. Now on the lock screen, they've made one minor change here. So these are apps that you can launch quickly from the lock screen just by swiping up on them. So you can see it jumps right to the camera if you swipe up over that app. Now they do change, Verizon does remove the Chat On app from this phone and instead just uses the standard messaging app. Chat On was kind of a free client for messaging between Samsung devices. It's kind of like iMessaging, if you're familiar with that on iOS. iMessaging allows you to message between iOS devices free of charge. So instead we have the standard messaging app here. That takes you right to it. Now the lock screen also has a few Verizon apps. So you can see we have the standard suite of Samsung and Google apps and widgets on the home screens, but they've added this home screen full of Verizon apps. That includes My Verizon Mobile, so that's your portal to your Verizon account, the Verizon App Store, the VZ Navigator, which is a subscription-based navigation service, as well as the voicemail app. Also under apps are some additional Verizon apps in addition to all the Samsung apps and Google apps. Now one of them is Color, which is basically a sharing service, so you can share video, photos, that sort of thing on your Facebook account. Another thing they've added is mobile hotspot, which we'll take a look at, as well as a VPN client and VCast tone, so you can download ringtones for your phone. Now, Verizon has also placed more emphasis on Wi-Fi connectivity. So it wants you to use Wi-Fi whenever possible. So instead of having a simple Wi-Fi toggle up here, they've moved it to the system tray here so you can quickly get to your Wi-Fi settings. You can't swipe this out of the way. This is always present. So you can jump right to your Wi-Fi settings and manage your Wi-Fi connections. So basically, it wants you to use Wi-Fi whenever possible, because if you're using 4G LTE, you're on a capped data network and you probably don't want to blow through it if you have Wi-Fi available. Now Verizon also adds mobile hotspots. So if you want to use this as a wireless modem for another device, say an iPad or a MacBook or some other wireless device, you have that option. It is a separate service that you do have to subscribe to and pay for. So if you toggle that on and off, it's going to verify that you're a subscribed user. As you can see my network ID up here, and we can go to configure here. So that's our network ID, and that's what we'll look for when we go to connect to this device. And we have our password here. So we can enter in another password of up to 8 characters at least. We're just going to stick with that and click Save. Now once you've turned on the hotspot feature, you can see that we have a little indicator up here letting us know that the feature is active and the number of connections. So we have one device connected to it right now, and that's because I've connected my iPhone 4. And it's easy to do. All I have to do is go to Settings, go to Wi-Fi, and you'll see the device on the network. So all you have to do is tap on the device, enter in that password, and you're good to go. So now you can take advantage of that 4G LTE speed. Now there are two other differentiating factors here. That includes the internal specs. So we have that 1.5 gigahertz dual-core Snapdragon processor versus the 1.4 gigahertz quad-core Exynos processor. So even though this is clocked a little higher, this is running at 4 cores. So the potential here is much higher. And of course, it depends on how software utilizes this. The other thing is we have 2 gigs of internal RAM here versus 1 gig of RAM on the international version. Now you really have to take a look at benchmarks in order to appreciate the difference, because in terms of real-world performance, there is no difference. I've been using this phone for about a month, this phone for about a week. I can't detect a difference. So if you look at the benchmarks, I'm going to take a look at what the Verge ran, and I'll post a link in the description below so you can take a look at that. But the Verge ran benchmarks which reveal that in terms of the quadrant and Velamo tests on the GL benchmark utility, you can see that the Verizon version and AT&T version was slightly under the international version. Not a big difference there. Now the real difference shows up when you take a look at gaming performance. So if you look at the Egypt benchmarks, both in 720 and 1080p, you can see that the international version almost doubles the performance or frame rate of the 4G versions in the US. Now the real standout feature here is Verizon's 4G LTE speeds. So as you can see with a series of benchmarks here, this was indoors and this was outdoors. You can see I can get about 15, 12, 10 megs down and around 12 to 10 up. So you can get amazing speeds with 4G LTE. Now in the lower part of the phone, we also have our capacitive backlit buttons, including our menu button, which is contextual. Depends what displayed or how it behaves depends on what app you're doing or where you are in the phone. We also have our back button, and we have our standard physical home button. In order to access our recent apps, all you have to do is tap and hold the home button. Takes you right to them. So here you can jump right to them or swipe them out of the way. And if you tap and hold the menu button, it takes you right to search. Now, in case you're wondering, of course, this does still have Samsung's S Voice, which is sort of a Siri competitor. And to access that, all you have to do is double tap the home button. What's the weather like in Rochester?
Here is the weather for Rochester, Michigan.
Now, as I've said, I've already done a thorough review of the Galaxy S3 in a previous video. You'll find a link in the description below. But one of the things I didn't mention in that review is actually one of my favorite features after using the phone for about a month. One of the great things here is you can quickly dial a contact or message a contact by swiping left or right. So believe it or not, this is actually very slick and useful. So for example, if I want to call that number, all I have to do is swipe right. We're going to end that and get back to that contact list. Or you can swipe left to message them. Now, another very useful feature here is that when you're text messaging somebody and you lift the phone to your face, it will automatically dial that number. Definitely one of my favorite features. I've actually used it a lot, and I miss it when I go to any other phone. Now, all 4G versions of the S3 do lose one of the features available on the international version, and that's an FM radio app. Now, the hardware is still there, but it has been disabled, so you don't find this app installed, but this does have the hardware built in, so maybe somebody will be able to get it to work, or it will be activated in the future. But all you had to do was connect a pair of headphones, that was your antenna, and you can listen to your FM radio. Now, in terms of battery performance, this is where there's a lot of concern thanks to 4G LTE. A lot of people assume that it will zap the battery pretty quickly, but it really isn't that perceptible, at least from my use. So in the past week, I've been using it as my daily driver, and it performs about the same as my Galaxy S3 Unlocked running on AT&T and my iPhone 4S. So I get a full day of charge using it under normal circumstances. So that's a few phone calls here, a lot of web browsing, checking messages. So overall performance is pretty comparable. So in conclusion, the Galaxy S3 on Verizon is pretty much the Galaxy S3 you would use on any other carrier, internationally or locally. But you do get one of its greatest assets, which is Verizon's 4G LTE network, which is the most mature and widespread LTE network in the US. So you're guaranteed some awesome speeds. Verizon 4G plus the Galaxy S3 is a pretty awesome combo. So that's going to do it for me, guys, in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.